Going from a blank screen to a finished website can be daunting. What's the best way to get started? And what are the rest of the steps involved? Good designers don't immediately start creating color palettes or coding a web page. Instead, they start by learning the goals of the site. Then they consider the audience that will use it. And finally, they gather the content that needs to be present. It's only after this initial phase that they're ready to start on the layout and visuals. For many people, design can feel ambiguous. There's no single path to follow, and there are no industry standard procedures. It's inexact and filled with decision making. That means that with every new design, it's best to assume as little as possible and learn as much as you can. And designing a website is no different. The early phases of design have many names, but sometimes people call this first chunk the discovery phase because we're trying to find as much information as we can before we start designing something that doesn't actually fit the right needs. A great way to start a new web project is to take a step back from the computer, talk to people in your organization, and ask, why are we building a website? Another way to think about it might be, what is the purpose of our website? Or what are problems that we're trying to solve by building a website? It might seem like an obvious question, but the answers are not always so obvious. You may want a site to increase awareness of your brand for when people are making purchasing decisions in the future. You could also want them to immediately purchase a product or service, share your content, or take any number of other actions. For instance, let's say that we're a web designer at a company, and the company is launching a new product called Flamingo Friend. It's a smart device connected to the internet. It goes in a front or backyard of a home, and it tracks the health of grass by measuring hydration, pH levels, and other metrics. Most projects have what are called stakeholders. A stakeholder is a person that has an interest in a project or some level of involvement. This could include clients, managers, coworkers, or anyone else that might have a vested interest in the outcome of the project. When you talk to stakeholders, it's important for you to ask questions that help you understand the organization's strategy and their priorities. In the case of a product launch, you might ask things like, how important is this product launch to the company? How does this product connect with the company's brand? How does this product relate to other products the company has released in the past? For more questions like these ones that can help guide the conversation, check out the notes associated with this video. When you communicate with stakeholders, they can sometimes be too solution-oriented. They might propose that you design something a specific way or include a particular website feature. While that can give you some insight into their thinking, make sure that you follow up those types of requests so that you understand the underlying intent. People tend to jump right into the details of building a solution, like the color of a web page or the types of pictures to display. But during discovery, your job as a designer is to keep the conversation focused on defining the problem. If you jump to a solution too soon, there's a good chance you'll completely miss the goals of the project. A quick solution might also not communicate with the audience effectively, and you might mistakenly leave out important information. In this case, we're just going to create one page of what would normally be a larger and more complex website. We'll pretend we've spoken to the product and marketing teams, and they want us to create a landing page. Typically, a landing page is a special destination on a website for a marketing campaign. This could be for the launch of a new product, the announcement of a sale, or a new PR initiative for the company. A special URL like example.com/product is an opportunity to create a design that's custom tailored to the campaign and gather more accurate analytics data about the success of the campaign. Let's say that after 1 or 2 meetings with the marketing team, we've agreed that the landing page needs to do 3 things: capture the attention of a website visitor, educate visitors about the product, and entice visitors to pre-order the product. So, with those three fairly straightforward goals in mind, let's move on. In order to successfully reach the goals you've set for a website, you have to understand the target audience. That means taking the time to learn about the people that will be using the website. The more information you can uncover, the better, because it will help you make more informed design decisions. For example, the way you'd most effectively communicate to a child is different than the way you might communicate to a young adult, which is also different from the way you might talk to a senior citizen. Who is your audience? You should try to gather demographic information like location, age ranges, gender, or income level. This will help you make better guesses about what types of design and language they will understand. For example, if you're marketing a product intended for young adults, you could interview them about how they use the web. You'll probably find that they use social media frequently. This information can influence how you communicate with them and what you put on your site. For example, if they're Facebook users, you could think of ways to connect your site to Facebook to better spread your product's message. Or if you're marketing a service to one audience in a market that has traditionally skewed toward a different audience, you might need to explain the service in greater detail. Keep in mind, this sort of information is qualitative, not scientific. You're interviewing a few people, not surveying everyone who might use your product. So it should only be used as general guidance and not empirical fact. If the organization has already been operational for a while, you can often gather this type of data from customer databases or web tools like Google Analytics or Jetpack for WordPress. Spending time exploring this data might give you some additional insights you hadn't previously considered, such as how much time they spend on each page before they leave, or what types of designs get the best response. If that type of data isn't available, perhaps because it's a new business, you could try looking at competitor websites and judge their effectiveness on your own. Once you've gathered data about the audience, you can take things further with additional research. You could post a poll on social media, create personas, or conduct interviews and focus groups. This falls more into the realm of user experience research, which is a deep topic and beyond the scope of this course. But just know that if you don't feel like you have enough data, there are plenty of steps you can take to gather more. For the purposes of our product landing page, let's say that we've assessed some existing analytics data and we've been able to distill it down to a few basic assumptions. From our research, we discovered that most of our site visitors are 25 to 35 years old, they're homeowners, and they're social media users. So, put another way, we can make a guess that these are people that probably bought their first home not too long ago, and since they use a lot of social media, there's a good chance they're at least familiar with internet-connected home gadgets like lights and thermostats that you can control from a smartphone. Once you've spent time setting goals for the site and gathering information about the target audience, you should collect all of the content you'll need to put your design together. Generally speaking, this can include things like text, images, and company logos. It's possible there are also design guidelines to which you should refer for things like fonts and colors. Where these things come from might vary depending on the size of an organization and the scope of the project. If you're working in a small team, you might be the one creating a logo and doing a good chunk of the writing, which is usually called copy. Or you might have to take some product photos. For our exercise, let's assume we've been given a document with some copy and a logo. We're also told there will be some product photos closer to the launch, but those aren't available yet. It's a good idea to look these things over and make sure they're all usable. Check the copy for any misspellings, grammatical errors, or areas that you think might need clarification based on your previous research of the target audience. If you're given images, check for appropriate formatting. Ideally, logos and other graphics are delivered to you in a vector format so that you can turn them into SVGs. If you're working with photographs, you want the highest resolution you can find with the least amount of image compression, because you can always resize them and compress them yourself in an image editing tool like Photoshop. But if they're already heavily compressed or if they're too small, there's not much you can do. So it's best to learn these things before you start mocking up pages. This has been a broad overview of the discovery phase. Depending on the project, the organization, or your own workflow, this phase of the project could take up a lot more time and involve more steps. It could also be simplified. For our purposes, we're ready to proceed. We know what this page needs to do, we know the target audience, and we have all the content we should need to get started on a design. We're going to design a landing page that does three things: captures the attention of visitors as soon as they hit the site, educates them about the product, and then drives them toward a pre-order. They're 25 to 35-year-old homeowners that make heavy use of social media. We're designing a landing page for a marketing campaign, and ultimately, we want site visitors to pre-order the product. We want to draw attention to the pre-order offer, most likely in the form of a button or a link. This is what's called the call to action, because it's the behavior or action that we want to encourage in site visitors. It's important to define the call to action because when designing a website, it's best to design from the inside and work your way out. Let me explain. If you start designing a web page by adding the logo, navigation, footer, and everything else that goes around the content, then the purpose of the page might get lost. The page can become crowded with pieces of noise around the outer edges of the page without much room left to focus on the inside of the page where the content belongs. Instead, it's best to start with the primary purpose of the page and then build everything around each subsequent priority. That's what it means to design from the inside out. It's not always possible to do this on an existing web page, but for a landing page that's separate from the rest of the site, it can be a good approach. So the call to action will be to pre-order. With that in mind, we're ready to start wireframing the design. We're finally ready to create the first wireframe of our design. A wireframe is a simple version of the final product. Similar to how buildings are made using a simple blueprint drawing, websites are typically first designed with simple black and white lines that help frame where each piece of content should go. And they do sort of look like wires. There are lots of ways you can create wireframes. You could use pen and paper, or a program like Sketch or Photoshop or Illustrator. Personally, I like to use a program called Balsamic Mockups. It has lots of common things you'd find in a phone app or a website, and it gives everything a nice hand-drawn look so that when you present your wireframes to other people, it's clear that it's not intended to be the final product. I'm going to hop on my computer, and I encourage you to follow along. Again, you don't have to use Balsamic Mockups or even a computer, but that's what I'm going to use to demonstrate. If you want to follow on paper or in another tool, that's fine too. Point your web browser to balsamic.com. That's balsamic with a Q at the end. Then choose Download from the top level navigation menu, and then click to download Balsamic Mockups. The process will be slightly different if you're on a Mac or a PC, but the app will work the same. Once the installation is complete, take a moment to look at the interface. Along the top are several common items you might find on a website, like buttons, checkboxes, and other common interface elements. In the middle of the screen is a large grid where we can drag these items and resize them and arrange them however we'd like. In the spirit of designing from the inside out, let's start with a button. We'll change the text on this button to say pre-order now. Then let's make this button a little larger just by dragging on the handles here, because it's an important call to action. And then on the right side, we have some properties that we can adjust for the currently selected item. Let's scroll down here and increase the font size. Let's try something like 18. I think that looks good. And there are a few other things that we'll add, but that's enough for us to get started. We'll need a lot more than just a button, but if you'd like, take some time to play around with Balsamiq Mockups or whatever mockup tool you decided to use. In the next video, we'll design the mobile version of our site before moving on to larger screens. So far, we've just added a button. We're going to add a lot more, and while it might be tempting to think about what the site might look like on a desktop browser, we're going to start with the mobile version first. A desktop or laptop screen has a lot more space than a handheld smartphone. When you create a desktop website and work your way back to a mobile design, there's a temptation to fill in all the available space. Then it's hard to condense all of those elements onto the screen of a mobile device. Thinking mobile first is a lot easier because you can start with the simplest version that includes the most important details and then expand on those ideas to create the desktop design. Let's keep going. Beyond the call to action, the next two important things are capturing the attention of the customer and educating them about the product. We can't educate unless we have their attention first, so let's grab them with nice large product photos. Because we're on a mobile screen where horizontal space is usually limited, and we want both the photos and the call to action to be large, we probably shouldn't put them side by side. So let's add the product photos just above the button. So up here from my tools, I'll go to Media and drag out an image component here. And this will just be a blank image. We can resize this however we'd like. I'm going to move this pre-order button a little bit. And I think that looks pretty good. Now, let's zoom out a bit to view more of the canvas. To zoom in and out on Windows, hit the Control key and the plus or minus keys. On a Mac, it's Command and the plus or minus keys. So I'll just zoom out a little bit here. And I'll move these two things to get us some more space to work. This is looking good, but right now it's not immediately clear what this is or what we're pre-ordering. This is where we can lean on some of the copy to do the explaining. So in the document we received from the marketing and product teams, let's say we have a tagline. So we'll drag out some text here. And it says, keep your lawn healthy, period, and funky, exclamation point. Right now, this is too small, so I'll scroll down and increase the font size here. Let's maybe do 24. I think that looks good. And let's make sure this is centered so that no matter how we resize this, the text will always be in the middle. And then we can drag this around and use the smart guides in Balsamiq Mockups to help us center it with other elements. This might also be a good place to mention when this product is going to be available. So let's add that. I'll drag out some more text here and we'll say coming this summer. And again, this is a little too small. So let's make that bigger. And we'll put that just to the left of the button here. And let's just zoom in a little bit so this is easier to see. There we go. When people are pre-ordering something, they want to know when they can expect the product. So the visual proximity of coming this summer and the pre-order button is actually communicating. If we were to reverse the positions of these two text blocks, it might still work, but the context might be a bit more difficult to read. If people were to see coming this summer as the first thing they read, it might be confusing. What's coming this summer exactly? Now, let's add some of the remaining bits. Since this is the mobile version of the site, let's make a spot for a small product logo in the upper left. So I will go to images here, or media rather, and grab an image, and let's just make that nice and small like that, and keep it up here on the left. That will be our product logo. And because this is part of a larger website, we want to add some navigation. So let's add a menu button in the upper right here. I'll drag out the icon component here. And then we can search for an icon that we want. So I'll type in something like menu. And there is our little 3-line hamburger menu. And we can change the size of it here in Balsamic Mockups. I'll change it to medium. I think that's pretty good. Let's make the logo a little smaller to match up with that. That works. And I'll align this with the right side. And we know that our site visitors are heavy social media users, so we can get away with iconography like this because they've probably seen it in other websites. Next, if the site visitor still wants to know more about the product, they'll likely scroll down the page, and let's add some of the remaining marketing copy there. So I'll just select text, and let's grab a block of text. And in Balsamic Mockups, we don't have to type in anything exactly. We can just have this nice text block here. And that will be our additional marketing copy. And if you want, you can put in the real copy there. And in fact, that is a little bit better so that you know the exact spacing, but this is fine for now. So let's zoom out just a bit so that we can see the whole length of the site there. And finally, at the bottom of the page, let's add iconography for the company's social media profiles, since again, this will be something that speaks to our audience. So I'll move this text up just a little bit, and let's go back to our icons here. And we could just drag in the icon component, or we can search for icons here. So I'm gonna look for Facebook. So we'll go to the F's here, and I'm just going to grab this Facebook square. That's good. And then let's scroll over to Twitter. And of course, we could add more social media profiles if we wanted to, but we'll just do these two. There is the Twitter square. So we'll drag that in. And let's just put these side by side at the bottom of the site, and then we'll select both of them to kind of get them centered together. This is a good start, and now we're ready to move on. Generally speaking, it's a good idea to think in terms of iterations or passes. An iteration is one version of your project, and there will likely be several versions between the start and the final product. When creating a design, your first idea is almost never your best idea. There are always things that can be improved or changed to better suit the goals of the project. For example, the arrangement of page elements we created on a mobile device probably isn't the best way to communicate with the audience on a desktop computer. Or perhaps after stakeholders see the first version of the site, they might ask for changes. After the product launches, you might get feedback from customers or information that comes from analytics data. In almost every case, your first try isn't going to be your best work, so you should embrace all the feedback you can and use it to make the project better. We've done a first pass on the mobile version of the site, but there might be some ways we can make it better. We've created this free floating design, but we should wrap it in a mobile phone container. Let's drop in an iPhone container. So I'll go to containers, and you can drag in either iPhone or smartphone. I'll just pick iPhone here. And let's drag that onto the canvas. And these containers will be scaled appropriately. And if we zoom out even further, we can see that this website doesn't quite fit into this container. And you'll also notice that it's going behind the container. So to fix that, we can just click on the container and then right click or secondary click and choose send to back. And then the other thing we should do is actually lock this layer. So let's move this over to the upper left, right click on it and choose lock iPhone. And that will lock the layer in place until we right click on it again and choose unlock. And that way we won't select it accidentally. So now let's try to put this website inside of this iPhone, and you can see it doesn't quite fit. So we need to make some adjustments so that this site is proportional to this particular device. So let's zoom back in and let's start working on these adjustments. So first, I'm going to make this image a bit more narrow. I'll move coming this summer in a bit. We can make this pre-order button a little bit smaller. And we'll decrease the font size a bit, maybe to 16. And I think that looks pretty good. Up here, we need to reduce the size of this tagline. So let's maybe try 18-point font. That works. And we'll bring in this logo and the hamburger menu. And that's looking good. Now we just need to adjust some of this copy. And it's okay if this ends up scrolling further down the page once the final copy is in place. It's not a big deal. We just want to align everything right now. And then we'll put the social buttons back in place and center them on the page. Okay, great. Now we can zoom out and take a look at what this looks like. I'm generally pretty happy with this. I'm gonna move these elements down just a little more to give each one of these things some room to breathe and give it some space. And I think that looks pretty good. This feels a bit cleaner than the free floating page we had previously. Elements are properly scaled to fit the context of the phone, and they're aligned with one another along an imaginary grid. However, it's still a smart idea to design without putting a box around your work at the start. Keeping the space open will allow you to think freely and come up with the best way of presenting the information rather than trying to cram it into an arbitrary area. Now, let's keep this design on the side, and we're going to select all of these elements, and we'll copy them by hitting Control-C on Windows or Command-C on Mac, and then click in any blank area, and we'll paste them by hitting Control-V on Windows or Command-V on Mac, and that will duplicate the items, and we can just drag these over to the right here. This is what's going to become our desktop layout. So first, Let's make this headline a lot bigger so that it stretches across a wider area. I'm going to zoom out just a bit to give us some room to work. So we'll bring this font size back up, maybe say something like 40, or we can probably go even higher here to something like 60. I think that looks good. Move these items out of the way here. Now let's make the area for our images bigger to match. So I don't think they need to stretch all the way across the horizontal width of the page like on a phone layout, but we'll make them still pretty large here and maybe take up a good chunk of the left side. Next, let's put this pre-order button to the right side here. We want the images to capture their attention, but we don't want to shove the button all the way out of the way because that's the call to action. So we want that up high on the page, kind of front and center. So let's make this button a little larger. I think that's good. And we'll make the font sizes larger here. Maybe say 20 or even 24 on that. And let's do something similar for the coming this summer. Say 20, maybe even like 28. That's pretty good. And we'll center that along the button. So let's zoom in a little bit, get a better look at this. This looks like it's coming together nicely. Move this up a bit. We still want to include the marketing copy down here to educate the customer, but stretching it all the way across the full width of the page will make long lines difficult to read. So let's just stretch it across the width of the product images. So we'll say that's kind of the space for this copy. And of course, in our final design, we would adjust things like font sizes and so forth to make it fill the space a little bit more neatly. And this does leave the right side a little bit bare, but this type of thing can be changed later when you further iterate on the design. And this could be resolved with higher fidelity design details, like a square box around the pre-order area to separate the page into two columns. Or the page could be tweaked with different fonts, sizes, line heights, and so forth. This wireframe is just meant to get all the elements into one place. Now let's stretch out the logo a little bit, because on the desktop version of the site, we'll probably have the full logo lockup with the image and then the company name rather than just a small icon. And we can do the same with the navigation. So let's delete this small menu here. And I'm going to go to text, and I'll grab this menu bar here. And typically this is meant for an actual desktop application, but we can use it for this website too. And we can separate each element with a comma. So we'll say home, products, support, and the about page. So we'll stretch these out. And let's bump up that font size as well. Maybe something like 16. And we'll align that with the right side of the page and the middle of this logo. And we're almost done. Let's just move these social icons around a bit, maybe change them to be extra large icons. That's good. And let's try to find the center there. I think that's pretty good. And finally, let's put all of these elements inside of a browser window so that we can clean things up a bit further. So I'm going to go to containers, and instead of an iPhone, I'm going to drag a browser window into place here. And we'll right click on that, say send to back, and we'll zoom out a bit further here. And we can just kind of wrap all these page elements just like this. And of course, a browser window can be resized however the user might like. So we'll just wrap these elements just like this and zoom back in. And I think this looks pretty good. I'm going to lock this browser into place. Maybe move some of these elements down here to give them a little bit more vertical space. Give that tagline some room to stand out on its own. And now we have two different screen sizes side by side. We can compare the two to make sure that we're delivering a good experience on both. And the desktop size we designed will likely fit smaller screens and possibly tablets. If you wanted to take things further, you could create an even larger layout and have one more size up for particularly large screens, but we'll stop there. We just iterated a bit on the design we already created, but if you want to do more exploration, you should take some of the same elements and come up with a completely different design. Perhaps there are other approaches that do a better job of communicating to the audience that you could iterate on even further. I hope you enjoyed this overview of designing websites. Like I said at the beginning, there's no standardized approach, and this is just one way of tackling the problem. You should feel free to be flexible and experiment with different techniques to find the one that works for you.